And while you're doing that, I forgot something down here. Let me go get it. Hopefully I won't make crazy noises. Yeah, I'm going to make crazy noises. Right. Will you get that book, Lee's book, out of my computer case? So, okay, so Nehemiah, it's in the Old Testament. Nehemiah, Esther, Job. So it's like how I remembered it, but then you got to find Nehemiah. So Ezra is before Nehemiah. So anyway, I'm just going to read some things. I'm going to read basically the first chapter where you guys can understand it. And I believe the Lord has something to say to us tonight out of this. So the words of Nehemiah, the son of, and I'm not going to pronounce probably all these words right, so y'all just bear with me. The H one. And it came to pass in the month Chislew, I think, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the palace. Now, Chislew is the 9th month of the Jewish year. It's corresponding to the, it's like our November, December, okay? And Nehemiah is, he is under King Artaxerxes. How did you say that?
Artaxerxes.
Okay, so that one. And he's a Persian king. Okay, and I'm just going to tell you, I'm not really very good with these words here, but you know, you can follow along in your Bible. You can figure out what I'm trying to say. But anyway, Nehemiah was the king's cupbearer. Okay, now Nehemiah, most probably, he was a Jew, but he was born in captivity. Okay, so he was this king's cupbearer, this king that basically had invaded the Jews, and you know they took them all captive, and so Nehemiah was born in a place where he wasn't in his homeland, and but he had prospered. And, you know, just because he was in captivity there, God had really helped him get a good job, okay? So he was the king's cupbearer. That's a really good position, okay? All right, so anyway, verse 2, then Hanani, one of the brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah, and I asked them, Nehemiah is talking, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity concerning Jerusalem. Verse 3, and they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. So, basically it was in ruins, okay? And it came to pass, verse 4, and it came to pass when I heard these words, that I sat down and wept, and mourned certain days, and fasted, and prayed before the God of heaven. Now, I'll tell you right there, Nehemiah had been taught about God. Okay, he was a practicing Jew, and so he prayed to God. He was not like a non-practicing Jew. He was very, he knew about things. Okay, and but even though he probably had never seen Jerusalem, it didn't keep him from loving it. It was in his heart. That was his homeland. And when somebody came and told him, and he's asking them, this is not just a normal reaction, okay, for Nehemiah to have to sit down and just really be moved and really weep about this. He had never even been there. And God had really just put this on his heart. Okay? And so in verse 5, and he said, I beseech thee, O Lord God of heaven, the great and terrible God, that keepeth covenant and mercy for them that love him and observe his commandments. He knew something about God. Amen. Right there, it just tells you. Okay? It's amazing that Nehemiah was citing God's mercy. He was part of the Jews who had been born and raised in exile, which was the result of God's judgment on Israel. He could have been bitter, but in truth, the Lord had been very good to those who had been carried captive to Babylon. Now think about this. He was prospering there. He was the king's cupbearer. Okay? Verse 6, let thine ear now be attentive, Nehemiah is praying, and thine eyes open, that thou mayest hear the prayer of thy servant, which I pray before thee now, day and night, for the children of Israel thy servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against thee, both I and my father's house have sinned. Verse 7, and we have dealt very corruptly against thee, and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the judgments, which thou commandest thy servant Moses. You know, Nehemiah accepted the responsibility for the actions, for their actions, and even though it caused them to go into exile, he just acted, he accepted the responsibility. He didn't try to blame his problems on somebody else. But he got positive results, as we'll see. Verse 8, remember, I beseech thee, the word that thou commandest thy servant Moses, saying, if you transgress, I will scatter you abroad among the nations. So that they knew why they were scattered, okay? And that's exactly what had happened to them, okay? Verse 9, but if you turn unto me and keep my commandments and do them, though there were of you cast out to the uttermost part of heaven, yet I will gather them from thence, and will bring them into a place that I have chosen to set my name. Now these are the servants of thy people, whom thou hast redeemed by thy great power and by thy strong hand. You know, despite the circumstances they were in, they were still God's people. You know, no matter what circumstance you find yourself in, if you're a believer, it's never too late. Amen. Never too late. And so Nehemiah is praying, and he says, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servant, to the prayer of thy servants who desire to fear thy name, and prosper, I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. You know, the Lord had already positioned Nehemiah in a place that granted him access to the one man that could turn this situation around. And all he needed was the king's approval. Now think about this. This is kind of God's positioned Nehemiah there. This was no accident. And Nehemiah, I think he knew it, and he was thanking God for the place, the position that he was in. All Nehemiah needed was the king's approval, and the problem could be solved. Hence, this prayer for the Lord to turn the king's heart. You know, I believe the Lord strategically places us in a position to accomplish what He's called us to do. Y'all believe that? I believe it. So basically in chapter 2, it came to pass, verse 1, it came to pass in the, he's talking about in the month, Nisan, okay, in the 20th year, the king, so Nehemiah has taken wine before him, and he took up the wine, he gave it to the king. And it says, now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Remember when Esther went before the king, it was a great big deal for her to go before the king. Okay? But you couldn't be sad in the presence of the king. But as you'll see here, and I just encourage you guys to read about this, as this goes on, the king and the queen were friends with Nehemiah. Okay, because they're asking him, basically it goes on to talk about that he goes before the king, and verse 2 he says, wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. And then Nehemiah says, I was sore afraid, because he's fixing to ask the king for something big. Okay, now think about it. If our country was under the rule of somebody else that had conquered us, and you're working for the king of that country, and you're going to go ask him about rebuilding a wall in your city that he conquered, that they burned. That's pretty bold. That's pretty bold. In fact, beforehand, the kings before that had decreed they could not do that. That's why it was still in ruins, okay? All right, so verse 3 there, Nehemiah says, and said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchre, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? You know, Nehemiah was a generation removed from Jerusalem, and he had been promoted to a high position, yet he longed for his homeland and his people. You know, if Nehemiah was just in this for himself, he wouldn't have asked for this. He was asking for something that was not selfish, okay? And God, I really believe God put this desire in his heart to have Jerusalem, that wall rebuilt, okay? And so the king's telling him, well, what are you making this? What's your request? And it's so funny in verse 4, it says, then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? And Nehemiah says, so I prayed to the God of heaven. Have you ever gone and asked somebody something and you're praying at the same time?
Yes.
This is what he was doing. I'm going to tell you, this is what he was doing. He was asking a big thing. And let's see, in verse 5, and I said unto the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father sepulchres. Yeah, I know that word. I just had a hard time saying it. Okay, that I might build it. Okay, so the rebuilding of Jerusalem had been seen as an act of rebellion by the first king, and so this was a bold request from Nehemiah. All right, and like I said before, Nehemiah had a really good relationship with this king and queen. Okay, and so they wanted to know how long he was going to be gone, because you know what? They were friends with him. They liked him. That's right. So they're like, well, how long is this going to take you? And yeah, I'm hot too. Is it like hot in here to y'all? It's hot. Am I the only one? I see some of my other kindred spirit back there fanning. Okay, so anyway. Okay, so I'm going to try to just tell this because I do not have time to read all this. But Nehemiah had this desire to go rebuild this wall in Jerusalem, and he's asking this king to do it. And it's amazing his position. He's the cupbearer. And so the king grants him, says basically, okay, I'll do it. How long are you going to be gone? And then Nehemiah says, yeah, and can I have some, can I have permission to get the wood and stuff I need to rebuild it? The king says, yeah. So basically that king's paying for it. And then he goes on and says, hey, and I need letters for these other people, these other cities that they need to know. You said it's okay for me to do this, and they're not going to come against me. And so the king says, okay. And so basically, what I feel like the Lord is saying tonight is that he's calling Nehemiah to do something. And it is God that he do it. And God has called every one of us to do something. But just because the king, he's got all this favor right now, doesn't mean that if you get into it over there and start doing it, you're like, oh yeah, this is God. Look, he's giving me this and I got this or whatever. That don't mean that you're not going to have trouble. And that doesn't mean you're not going to have to work. And I think a lot of us, a lot of times get into a situation where we feel like God's called us to do something, and maybe at the beginning it's like, oh yeah, this is God, this is working out, and this is working out, and yeah. But then we get into some resistance, and we get into some hard times, and then we feel like, well, this isn't God. And that's not true. In this story, as it goes on, Nehemiah, he goes to look at the walls, and he goes, he didn't go just shouting to those people that he sees when he gets to the city, hey, I'm here, we're going to rebuild the walls. You know what he does? He goes at night, before he's told anybody why he's there. He has a couple of people with him, and he's going around at night just assessing the situation. A lot of times, we get so excited about something, we start telling everybody what we're doing, and God hadn't called everybody what you're doing. And honey, they will rain on your parade.
You got that right.
You ever had that? Somebody try to suck the vision right out of you? Tell you can't do that? I'm going to tell you, just because you encounter resistance, just because somebody tells you maybe you can't do that, maybe you don't have that personality, well, I don't see how that could happen for you, doesn't mean it is not the Lord. Y'all need to get this, because some of you, God's called you to do something, and it seemed like it was going fine at first, and then you get resistance, and man, there's a lot of work involved, and you think, this can't be God. I'll give you a really good example of where this takes place. You get married and start a family. Hello? My gosh, it seems like after I bet you probably everybody in here that's married, before the third day, you had a fight and you're thinking, wait, what happened? If this is the person that I'm supposed to be with, why are we having this disagreement? Or, hey, we're going to go do this, and you got this big plan for life, and maybe you get a job situation that's not going so good. You have to change, or you have some kids that come along, and financially things seem to be tight. And plus, when you get an apartment or a house or wherever it is that you and your darling are living, there is work involved in that place. If you turn on the oven, there's going to be dishes to wash.
Yep.
Okay, if there's babies involved, you're going to be changing diapers. You're going to lose sleep. And, how many of you guys know if you get hungry and tired at the same time, it's just not fair for the other person. It's just not. It's not fair. Because that is just not a good mood to encounter. I have a rule around my house. We just can't have any big family meetings or make any big decisions if somebody's hungry or tired. Ain't happening tonight. We'll wait till tomorrow. It's not a good thing. Y'all ever encountered any of this? Okay? All right. So Nehemiah is looking at all this stuff, okay? And okay, hold on just a minute. Okay, and so Nehemiah tells the people, we're going to rebuild this wall. And, these people, Nehemiah's never even been there. I don't even know if they knew who Nehemiah was. Think about it. Nehemiah wasn't born there. He was born over in this other place. And so he's telling them, hey, we're going to, Jerusalem's in waste, and the gates were burned with fire. Let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more of reproach. Okay? All Nehemiah did was point out what was obvious to the world who had been living there, right? And a lot of times I think nobody else had done it because that was like a pretty big task. And most of us, well, I shouldn't say most of us, a lot of people, let me just say that because I ain't saying that about y'all. A lot of people will take the path in life like water takes. The least resistance. I'm going to tell you that God has not called us to the path of least resistance. He has called us to be great. He's called us to do something awesome. But a lot of us don't want to do it because work. The 4-letter word work. We think that cannot be God. The wonderful thing about this whole thing with Nehemiah is these people overcome all these odds. And, I'm telling you kind of, if you don't know the story, I'm telling you what happens. But they overcome all these great odds of building this wall. They overcome financial things. They overcome, just lack of people. It's not like they have all these people. They overcome these enemies. And there was not one miracle that happened with them. God didn't send angels and move the stuff out of the way. He didn't send, this big, tornado to clean everything up. He didn't do any of that. Probably the greatest miracle happened when all these people worked.
Yeah.
And they didn't quit. That's a major miracle. Okay? They encountered all this stuff. And then there's these other guys that are around there, Sanballat and Tobiah. When they heard that Nehemiah was going to build this wall, they started laughing at him. Now, how many of you, nobody likes to be laughed at. And they're laughing at them like making fun of them. Not laughing because they think they're just funny. They're just laughing because they're making fun of them. They're laughing them to scorn. Okay? And then they start telling them, you can't do this anyway because you're rebelling against the king. Well, thank God Nehemiah had the letter. He wasn't rebelling against the king. And so anyway, they're against all this stuff. And one of the things, the reason Sanballat and Tobiah were there is because these people had stopped doing what God had told them to do. There was the law of Moses and all the things that Moses had told them to do, and they just kind of put it aside. They stopped tithing. One of the things that God had told them to do was not to marry your enemies. And they had let people, that's the reason Sanballat and Tobiah were there. Because they had let their daughters, there was a daughter that had married, I think, into Sanballat's household, and a grandson, a priest, one of the priests, had let his grandson marry into Tobiah's home, or in their family. Okay, these people were causing problems. You know, now, today it's a little different, but I will tell you, it is a good thing not to marry somebody. That's why the Bible tells us don't be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Because I will tell you, they will lead you from the Lord. They will lead you from the Lord. And so I encourage parents, don't be all like whatever when your beautiful son or daughter comes home and says, oh, Mom, this is who I'm supposed to marry. I hope you have enough in their life right now to where they will listen to you. And I want you to stand up and tell them if they've got some whatever person that's not equally yoked with them, that you will have the guts to stand up and say, you know, God speaks to me too. And until He's told me that ain't happening. I can see y'all are really excited about that. But I'll tell you, that'll take you a long way. Anyway, so Nehemiah is praying, and he's answering his enemy. And he said to them in verse 20 in chapter 2, the God of heaven, He will prosper us. Therefore, we His servants will arise and build. But you have no portion, no right, no memorial in Jerusalem. You know, these guys were jealous. Sanballat and Tobiah, they were jealous because they were kind of the it man then around there. They were jealous. There are people that are going to come against what God's calling you to do. Because if they're insecure, it's going to shine the light on that. And they're not going to like it if they feel like you can do something that they're not doing. I'll tell you, I've heard Jesse Duplantis talk about it. I think it was Jesse. And he talked about your vision. If you are not talking about your vision will talk about you. But I'll tell you, if God's given you something to do, if you're succeeding in the kingdom, if you're standing for the things of God, and you are talking to somebody about it, and they're not, man, they will try to bring you down because it makes them look bad. Y'all ever notice that? Y'all ever had any of that? Okay, so I'm going to try to skip some of this stuff and just read. To talk to y'all about it. There was not a lot of people that lived beyond this wall. And basically, Sanballat and Tobiah were making trouble for Nehemiah. Okay? And the people were saying, you know, we don't have enough money. You're wanting us to work on this wall. And we don't even live around here. I mean, they were kind of out from the city, you know. So the people that were supposed to work on the walls, you know, the men that were working on the walls, they were away from their families. Okay? And then one of the things Nehemiah did was the people that lived close, like the closest place they lived, that was the part of the wall they worked on. It's kind of like sweeping your front steps, you know, the place you take care of your front place, the things that are in front of your house. And if your neighbor did the same, your whole street would be clean. Okay? Yeah, it works like that. So anyway, that's what Nehemiah was trying to get these guys to do. And they just were struggling. Okay? And then Sanballat and his guys they're telling them, we're going to fight you. You're not going to do this. We're going to come in there and fight you. And so Nehemiah is having to kind of rally the troops and tell them, you know what? We're going to have to build the wall. And we're going to have a sword in our hand. And so he asked the people, he said, I need you guys, move your families behind the wall, the part of the wall that you're working on. Move your families. You mean get them out of the comfort of where they are? Mm-hmm. Why? Because God's called us to do this. Oh, so it's going to be uncomfortable for a little while. We're going to have to leave our, you know, stuff and do this. Yep. Sometimes when God calls you to do something, you have to lay some stuff in your life aside to do it. That don't mean you're never going to do that again. That just means right now this takes priority. Okay? So these guys, he's moving the families, and then he called some people that were, I think, in Judah, and he's like, man, we've got all these people threatening to attack us, and so we need you. They were other Jews. He says, we need you to come and live here too while we're building this wall, because we need some numbers. How many of you guys have ever needed some help? You needed somebody to come stand in your corner with you. Because it's like the devil is just telling you can't do something. And man, it's just something else when somebody a brother or sister in the Lord comes beside you and says, you know what, you can do this. I'll help you. What can I help you with? And man, it's amazing the strength that you can draw. And it goes on to say that these guys not only were building with, they're building the wall and they've got the swords with them. They also said, we're not even going to change our clothes at night. When we sleep, we lay down to sleep, we're not going to put on our pajamas. We're going to stay in our clothes so we'll be ready to fight. Yep. They only changed their clothes when they needed to wash them. This is true. It's in there. So, and the devil, he will never come to you when God's given you something to do. He never comes to you when it's like a fair fight. He's like a bully. Yeah. When it looks like, maybe you're alone, he just likes to run his mouth a lot. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I will tell you, what has God called you to do? What has He called you to partner with? Who has He called you to partner with? What has He called you to do? And then, are you doing it? Are you backing off? You don't need to back off tonight. If God's put something in your heart, you need to know you can do it. You can do it. So they're building. They're building with, and I know before we've talked about this, one of the things that we talked about is building yourself up in the Word. You need to know what belongs to you. You need to know healing belongs to you. Just because you're not sick don't mean you don't need to listen to healing and remind yourself of healing, how it belongs to you. Because, you know what? The devil's going to knock it on your door one day and try to present something to you, try to give you something. And you need to already have it built up. So it's better to be ready to fight instead of having to build and fight. But you can build and fight. These guys did. You need to build and fight. Amen? Amen? Over in chapter 4, they had built the wall. And when Sanballat had heard they had built the wall, he was mad. And he took great indignation and mocked the Jews. He even came back and said when they were building the wall, one of these guys said, if a little fox came through there, he'd knock your wall down. Wouldn't you just want to knock him in the head? Yep. But Nehemiah didn't. He took those things that they were saying to the Lord. I'm going to tell you, it's important for us to take stuff that we hear, instead of trying to handle it, take it to the Lord. Because the Lord, I'm telling you, He is your vindicator. And He can get them back like we can. It's true. Okay? And anyway, so they're building this wall. They've got it almost all done. And Sanballat and them were just mad. But they didn't. They backed off the fighting thing because it was already done, except for the gates. There was only the gates left to do, and Nehemiah, they built the wall. If you read this, and I've been listening to this for a few days and just meditating on this, the thing is, not everybody, when Nehemiah went to this place and he saw these people, it wasn't like they were the best builders. In fact, some of the people wouldn't build. There were some people in chapter 1 that said, or maybe it was chapter 2, that they said they felt they were too big, just too high and mighty to build. Okay? But some of the daughters, in fact, some of the priestess' daughters were out there building too. So they had to use who was willing to work. I wouldn't call this the dream team to build the wall. But amazingly enough, they got this wall built in 52 days. Amen. it seemed like an impossible task. When they're building the wall, the people who are trying to get the rubble out of their way, they're saying, man, I'm just so tired. This rubble is too much. I don't see how we're going to do this. But they kept on. I'm going to tell you, you may look at what God's calling you to do, or something that God's called you to be a part of, and think, I just don't think we got the right stuff. But if God's called you to it, you can do it. Man, somebody ought to write that down. If God's called you to it, you can do it.
Amen.
If God's called you to it, you can do it. It don't matter how old you are. It don't matter how young you are. It doesn't matter how much money you got. It doesn't matter how much strength you have. If you're in shape, out of shape, whatever shape, you can do it. You can do it. Don't let some uncircumcised Philistine come into your life and tell you you can't do it. Don't let them make fun of you. I'm telling you, don't let that discourage you. They may do that, but I'm telling you, you don't need to be discouraged by this. To me, this whole thing about Nehemiah rebuilding the wall was like, man, he had the Z team. The last of the last. The ones that were not builders, the ones that they didn't have money, what they had was something that God wanted them to do, and they got it done. I'm telling you, if God's called you to do it, you can do it. Stop looking at things around you that are just, taunting. Don't let the devil tell you you're too old. You don't have enough education. You got too much education. You're this far down the road. Some of you in your families, y'all need to buck up. Cowboy up. Draw a line in the sand and say, hey, this is our goal. Maybe it was our goal 20 years ago, but honey, we're getting it back out and we're going for it. Because if you don't go for it, I'll tell you, you will never hit it. God's called you to something. God's called you to success. He's called you to do something great for the kingdom. And anytime God calls you to do something, He ain't called you by yourself. He has got people to help you get there. He wants you to hook up with something. If God's called you to something that you can do on your own, you hadn't heard from God. If it's not daunting, if it's not like, oh my, this don't look like I can do this at all, that's probably the Lord. You can make a difference. You are here. You are put here on this earth to make a difference. I encourage you guys this week, go read Nehemiah. If you can't understand it in the King James, go get the Message. You can look at that online. You can look at the NIV. You get it in a way that you can understand it. But I'm going to tell you, it was just like amazing what he did and the time that he did it. 52 days. Jerusalem, the wall was so spread out. When they were concerned about people coming in there and fighting, it was, imagine, and I don't know how big Jerusalem is. I don't know. I'm not really good at all that stuff. But just imagine, okay, I think about Johnston. I live in a small town, okay? I imagine just trying to build a wall around Johnston, okay? You're not going to be like this close to somebody. If people are assigned a certain position, you're not going to be able to talk to anybody way over here or way down there. Okay? They got a bugler in there, or somebody to blow the trumpet. I don't know if it was a bugler, but anyway, somebody was blowing a trumpet. So if somebody had to fight, they could blow the horn and everybody would run to there. Man, they did not have cell phones. Okay? So communication was not quite like it is today. Just imagine dead zone, And so they really had to communicate. But imagine the faith that it took for them to build each part of their wall. Each part. And that is what God calls us to do. It's like He's called us to something, and each person that is called has a part.
That's right.
And it's bigger than you. One family couldn't have built that wall. It's bigger than you, what God's called you to do. But I'll tell you, He's called you and equipped you to do your part. And it's personal and it's bigger than that. He's gifted you for something. You need to be a part of something that's bigger than you. You need to hook up where He's told you to hook up and don't unhook. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 6 says, So build we the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. You know, you got to get it in your mind to work on something that God's called you to, because it's going to take work. It is not just going to float down out of the sky and, have 3 angels sing to you, and here it is. It ain't happening like that. It's amazing. If you look in the Bible, anything that they did, just do a word study on work. Man, there's a lot of work. Jesus was called to, and when it talks about how he was in his own hometown and wasn't able to do many mighty works there because of their unbelief, he was called to work in the ministry. There's work all over. Whenever God's called us to do something, I think today, we just think that there's no work involved. One of the best things that we heard when we first started the church, we went to Jesse Duplantis. We went to a visionary conference of his, and it was for leaders. And, I'm telling you, I didn't know the ministry was going to require a lot of work. I mean, I thought we'd have to show up. But I didn't think we were going to have to work like this. And he said, I'm telling you, it helped us. He said, if you're in the ministry, you will work harder than you have ever worked before in your life. And it's the truth. And so in your ministry, what God's called you to do, it is going to require work. If you're raising a family, I'm going to tell you, those kids, you can't put them in a kennel and shut the door. Okay. You wish. Man, they require work, constant attention. The younger they are, the more attention you got to give them. And it's work. A newborn, man, you don't get to sleep for more than like 4 hours at a time and you're up. You want to start a business? Really? It's work. It's work. If you want to go in business for yourself, guess what? You just created a job for you. Hey, people don't, they're like, wait, what do you mean? I want to be my own boss. Well, if you don't work, you ain't getting paid. Because nobody else is coming in to work for you. You work for a company, you know what? That company expects you to work. They expect you to show up and do a good job. Work. God's called us to be successful. Don't let what you think of this, I don't know, Disneyland of the Spirit kind of thing. We're just going to float around and just receive all the stuff God's got. You're going to work. But it's worth it. Think about raising kids. Man, they required a lot of work, but it was worth it. You love those kids. No matter how many times you wipe their nose and change their diaper. You love them. They're worth it. Whatever you've gotten in life, it's required work. And I'm telling you. What? Yeah, I want my book. I want to encourage you guys tonight. Something I've been reading this book, and Pastor Lee Armstrong is Dwayne Sheriff's associate pastor, and he's been helping Rick and I, and Ryan Gray's helped Rick and I. But I started reading this book of his, and he talked about going on vacation. He talked about, and this is kind of, you can, maybe you'll feel a little bit better about the working thing, but God, when He calls you to do something in life, and you don't have to be called to the fivefold ministry for God to have called you to do something. He's called everybody to do something. So whatever it is you're doing, He's called. You need to know that whatever He's called you to do, it didn't have to be fivefold ministry, but He has called you to a church. I will say that He has called you. He's called you to do something, and it's going to entail work. But anyway, he was talking about how in ministers, a lot of times don't don't realize, or a lot of people that are involved in ministry don't understand how much work is involved in it. And he said, but God can do this thing where it's like you're working really hard, but he can make it feel like when you're on vacation. You know, when you go on vacation, you usually get up earlier, you stay up later, you work harder. You know what I mean? Because you're trying to do the things, especially with a young family. I know with us, it was like, oh man, it was hard. You know, it was a job to do anything on vacation. Man, it was like, you know, we had to get them dressed. We had to get up and do that every day with them on vacation and make sure. Then when we got somewhere, it's just like, where are they? How many we got? We got to do a head count and blah 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 blah. You know, and you spend more money on vacation, and everybody's happy about it. It's like, hey, we're on vacation. We need to do this. We're here. Let's do this while we're here. That can be how it is when God's helping you do this thing. So I'm telling you, ask God to just give you the wherewithal in yourself to not pay attention to the naysayers and the bullies and the devil and the people that are full of the devil. Man, some of them people are mean. Y'all not ever seen the devil in people? Man, it can be just mean. Mean. Okay? God's called you to do something. You're not a wimp. You're not a coward. If He's called you to do it, you can do it. Don't give up. And don't be afraid of work. Don't be afraid to do that. He's equipped you. You can do it. Go read Nehemiah and all these people that worked on this wall. I'm going to tell you. They weren't I'm telling you, they were the Z team. It was the Z team, but they got it done in 52 days. And people were amazed. And there were no miracles except for they had a mind to work together. So I encourage you in that tonight. I hope this has helped y'all. And that's all I got tonight. So let's stand up. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Let's pray. Father, I just thank you.